Welcome back to the Fabricators Podcast. On this week's podcast, we're going to be meeting with Matt Garbarino with Cincinnati Incorporated. Matt is the marketing director over at Cincinnati Incorporated, and we're also going to be meeting with Bob Farrell of Farrell Marcom, who you guys should be familiar with. He's written a lot of articles that have been published in a lot of the trade magazines within the fabrication industry. Today, we're going to be discussing digital training and what Cincinnati Incorporated is doing through the COVID pandemic and what they're going to be doing as they move forward as we move to a digital revolution when it comes to training new customers and current customers on software, hardware, and machinery inside of your shop. Let's get started. So welcome back, guys, and thank you so much for joining us at the Fabricators Podcast. Today we have Matt Garbarino joining us with Cincinnati Incorporated. Matt, it's great to meet you. Matt, what is your title at Cincinnati Incorporated?
I'm the director of marketing.
All right, wonderful. And we also have Bob Farrell with Farrell Marcom, who joined us last week. Today's topic that we're going to be discussing is remote learning and what Cincinnati Incorporated is doing around remote learning, especially in this pandemic, and what value that they think that it brings to their customers, not only their direct customers, but their customers in the marketplace that might be utilizing other equipment, and what they're leveraging and pushing out through remote learning, not only for educational purposes, but also marketing purposes when it comes to some of their customers and potential customers as we move forward. I know Bob Farrell has several questions that he would like to ask Matt Garbarino. I'm going to be hopping in here from the Secturasoft side, discussing a little bit about what we do from remote learning, how we position ourselves in the market space for our customers to help them increase what they could do over the web to learn our products and other products as well. And I'll discuss a little bit about our process that we have in place for remote learning as well. So, Bob, thank you so much. Do you want to go ahead and kick it off? And I know that you have a few questions for us.
I do. I think one of the topics that we could get a couple different perspectives on here is, when you talk about a fabricator, you're talking about training in a couple of different areas. One might be software training, which probably lends itself pretty well to the remote training applications. Another is shop floor activity. I wonder if, Matt, you could take a minute to kind of from Cincinnati's perspective, just outline what you're doing and how it might have changed a little bit in the last year, 6 months to a year, with regard to how you're engaging your audience there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, traditional training at Cincinnati, and I think with a lot of machine tool companies, has been kind of a twofold approach. It's either we have customers that come to our facility, and they do some in-classroom work and then, hands-on work on the machine, or B, that we send a trainer, to a facility and we're on that customer's machine. And it's a similar format where it's in classroom, typically a smaller group, and then on the machine. But there's a big gap between those two offerings. I mean, both are effective. They've been in place for decades, but in today's society, for a company to either, send a group of people away for 2, 3, maybe 4 days is challenging for a company to be, without that, that talent for that amount of time. And in the case of a machine operator, without someone running the machine. And even in the case when you're hosting it at a customer site where it's theirs, their machine has to be essentially idle, when it's being used for training purposes. So before this pandemic happened, we started to explore, ways to supplement that. And online training is not something new, although it's something newer for Cincinnati Incorporated. We really didn't have an online offering. I mean, yeah, we had YouTube videos that had short, how-to type things, but that's not true training where you're able to assess how someone is retaining the information. You're not testing them, you're not quizzing them, you're not interacting with them. So there is a place for that kind of stuff. So we had started an initiative to start building some online curriculum that is interactive, that's on demand. And, when you look at the audience that we sell to, you have everybody from someone in their 20s that's in a class all the way to potentially someone in their 60s. And how those people absorb and learn information can be dramatically different. The person in their 60s might want to be in person and want to see that person. And, when they get their certificate, they buy a frame and they stick it in their office. Whereas the 20-year-old, wants it on demand and do it in pieces, and be at Starbucks, having a latte and do it in segments. And then when they get their certificate, it's an e-certificate, and they put it on Instagram. So how they want to do the training, on what time they do it, and how they consume it and how they share it is dramatically different. And I think online training really helps supplement that, so that we give the option to the customer on how do you want to do it. So that's where we're going with it. I can talk a little about what we're seeing with the pandemic, which kind of forced our hand a little bit, if you want to transition to that.
Yeah, let's get into that. What have you seen along those lines?
So, I mean, as with really everybody, this took us all by surprise and changed dramatically the course of what we're doing. Our online training, initiatives had just, started before the pandemic. So certainly they weren't, already out there in the market or mature. They're in process. So one of the challenges we had is, from my standpoint, I'm a marketing director, right? So I'm constantly looking at how do we stay engaged to our audience, whether it's a CI customer or just somebody in the industry. And then that had to change with this pandemic. And so one thing that's always of value to anybody, whether they're a customer or a potential customer, is if they can learn something of value. So I had worked with our training department back in March and said, look, I would like to find a way that we can take what we've traditionally done in the classroom and really broadcast it, where we can do it over a condensed amount of time, both for Cincinnati customers and have some courses that pertain just to them, but also to just a general user. So what we did over the last just over 60 days is we've done 4, I'll call them broadcasted classes, kind of using a webinar format, but with webcams on the machine, where it was a kind of a hybrid approach where, we're presenting in a traditional web format where you share a screen, with it could be a few PowerPoint slides or even the control, but then we're putting a camera in front of the machine with a trainer, and we're demonstrating how to do things. And it could be something specific to Cincinnati on how to operate that machine, or it could be something more general on like preventative maintenance on press brakes. That anybody that has a hydraulic press brake, here's some tips that you should be aware of, to get more life out of your machine. And boy, I'll tell you, it was overwhelmingly successful as far as the attendance. We were getting registration numbers in the 300 to 400s, and then the actual attendance rate being about 60% of that. Which is very, very good for events like that, especially when we're just marketing that to our database. And I think people see value in that they can learn something. I think a lot of them are at home, or maybe their schedules have changed, so they have the time to invest, maybe, because these classes were anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. And we did do, 10-minute breaks throughout it. We literally had a timer come on and say, okay, we're gonna take a 10-minute break, the timer would count down, because it's a lot of information. But we had great retention through those long courses where people would stay the duration of it. And then the surveys that we had taken at the exit of them, we got 9 out of 10s on almost everything. So it just validated to us not only the need for online training, and people would do it, but when you offer something of value, educational nature, people will participate with it.
Right. Do you have these somewhere where someone might be able to view a past class that was given, or see a schedule for what might be coming up?
Yeah, so we, on our website, e-ci.com, we have an events section, and on there's one that will, under events, we'll put like webinars or training sessions that are planned, which we do have some that are on there. And then we have an archived section that you can go to, and then those are really on demand. So essentially, we record those events, we place them on there, and there is a registration component, so we can, capture the people that want to watch those on demand. And then all that is archived and available. So that's the neat thing about it, is you get more life out of the time investment from doing a session like that, hey, someone might have missed it, or maybe they did see it and they want to see it again, or they want to share it. They can go back and they can get access to those archive sessions and see them anytime.
Great. Hey, Brad, from your perspective, are you seeing anything different from what Matt outlined there?
No, I mean, I think what's funny about it is kind of where Matt began, where he was talking about, where Matt, you were talking about how you're doing a lot of in-person training. We actually started from the opposite side, but I think we had really a similar situation. So we started all web-based training, but there were all sessions that were set up. So we would set up traditionally, 2 to 3 1-hour training sessions on our software platform. But what we found was, because we were doing these online training sessions real time without any kind of follow-up. So exactly where Matt kind of said, where certification of training, testing comes into play. We were doing it ad hoc, but we had no follow-up. We had nothing that was sticky. We had no data to send back to the customers. We had nothing that they could re-watch multiple times over. So while we kind of started at two different ends of the spectrum, but both of them were real time, it seems like Matt is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but it seems like you're kind of coming over into the educational series where here's a series of processes. We're going to test you on these different processes. You're going to get certified on these processes. And even though we kind of started in person, just funny enough that is opposite, but the same. Now we're moving to the center as well, where we're having certification programs that people can go on at their leisure, kind of like Matt said. And if they're on the, if they're working from home, which everybody's doing right now, or as Matt also said, if you're at Starbucks grabbing a coffee, you can go through these processes. You can watch them multiple times over, but you can go in and get certified. You could test how much your knowledge and what you've retained, and then kind of see how that all kind of shakes out at the end. And then you can go back and rewatch it. So yeah, it's just interesting to me that Matt, when we first started talking, I thought it was going to be much more, you were in person and we were online and we were going to be, but I think we suffered from the same thing, which was retention of data and being able to reiterate that retention of data and have media that we can continually send out to our customers so that they could rewatch it and use it ad hoc or on demand basis. So just interesting, but yeah, absolutely. We're seeing the same thing that Matt's kind of experiencing, just in a different way.
I think both of you will probably agree also that if this had happened 20 years ago, we might be in trouble as far as remote training goes. I mean, today at our disposal, we have so many different platforms that support remote learning and communication and engagement, as Matt mentioned. I think I'm safe in saying that once people have been exposed to these things, it's going to be hard to get them to go back to anything that might have been traditional even a year ago. Not necessarily a bad thing, but where do you see training changing from here going forward, or you see it at all reverting to, no, I don't know, reverting is the right word, but at all kind of back to what the norm was a year ago?
Well, Matt, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Brad, from our standpoint, it definitely, you're right. I think that it does set the bar, higher to, for what people are going to expect. And look at when this all settles down, I think we can all agree, and we're observing, the work environments are changing. And maybe not always by choice, but people have discovered there are some roles that can be done, remotely or partially remotely. Maybe it's a hybrid approach. And I think training is that same way. So to give you an example, a traditional, let's say, press brake training class that Cincinnati would offer at our plant or at a customer's, it might be a 3-day course, but out of those 3 days, 1 day of it is hands-on, and really the other 2 days are classroom. And some of it is software. We have, control software, bend simulation software that, like Brad could probably attest to, when you're trying to broadcast or train on software, there's some things that are a little easier because you can not only show your screens easy, but you can kind of interact a little bit. You can see what they're doing and monitor what they're doing. So it kind of lends itself. That the trick for us is that hands-on thing. But I think what this showed us is that these classes, we might be able to do a hybrid approach. That, let's say we now offer day 1 and 2 online, so that the person that maybe did not want to send their employee to Cincinnati for 3 days because they just can't be gone, we now say, hey, we can offer the first 2 days online, and now you just send your employee 1 day to Cincinnati. And that might change their mindset to say, you know what, that I can do, because the 2 days we can do on demand, we can do it on our time, and we can accomplish that. And then the coursework that we need to do that's hands-on, we can schedule that because we're not having the time, allotment that's gone from that person for 3 days. It's 1 day. And worst case scenario, let's say they didn't do that 1 day. I mean, they still are getting 2 days of some training that they weren't even getting at all. It's not an all or nothing. So for us, it's opened up our eyes to say it doesn't all have to be online. I mean, definitely there's courses that, we have an initiative, we're doing that. But I think the hybrid approach can work as well, where we need to have that hands-on. That's one of the differences with the machine versus software. I mean, they're both hands-on, but the machine's different from the standpoint of how that hands-on happens. But we can do it both ways. And even if it's where they do the partial part online and the hands-ons at their facility, again, it's maybe 1 day versus 3 days of tying up people. It makes it easier for our trainer to be gone for a day. We can use them and leverage their availability much more. So that's, to me, regardless of what anything happens, is that, we see it not only just this is the demand, but it's actually going to help us from the standpoint of our resources. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure people are using our machinery as optimally as possible.
Yeah, and the same thing to that point, Matt. I think one of the biggest things that we found over this transition as well is we used to do something really similarly, where we would have, again, those on-demand type sessions where it would be a one-on-one with the trainer. But then what we would do is it would get to a point where you would have to make the transition from I'm training to in production, right? And so what we would do is we would send somebody on site or try to watch over them. One of the big things that we've implemented here lately is the idea of, for better lack of words, we call it homework, but I don't know what it's called. But hey, go out there, run this thing through. We have estimating software, so run this thing through an estimate. Send the estimate back to us. We'll see how accurate you are. Are you guys seeing anything like that as well, where you guys are coming up with? I know that you talked a little bit about certification programs, but like, what does that certification program look like, or do you have any kind of simulations that customers can run through themselves on something like a press brake or laser? Or
yeah, I mean, to get that certificate, that Cincinnati certificate that certifies that you completed successfully the course, to get that, it's the key part of that is that we're measuring and testing that trainer, or that trainee, I'm sorry, along the way. So it's not like you just attended and then you get the certificate, right? So there's not per se homework or anything like that, but what we are doing is, while we're there, there's not only the interaction, but there's this testing, and you have to complete each step to get to the final, including bending apart on the press brake yourself. And so that's how you get that. And one of the interesting things that I observed the last 60 days when we did, the broadcasted training, which was kind of a webinar format. I mean, you guys have done webinars before, right? And so, you do, let's just say it's a 45-minute webinar. You have an intro, you have PowerPoint slides, you might throw some polling questions out there, you might play a video, and there's a little interaction there, so people aren't, they're engaged a little bit, but you're not really, you don't have the interaction to the point where you're getting people talking to you and you're talking back. So what we evolved even in those 4 classes is that after every break, every 50 minutes to an hour class, we were looking at the Q&A and we were opening up the mic, if you will, live with those questions. And we were allotting a block of time to say, what we're going to do? We just covered this much material. And although we can't test you on it and certify you to this next step because of the way we're doing this right now, what we can do is answer your questions and then maybe demonstrate or kind of go through and ask you questions back. Like, hey, if you ask this question, we're going to ask it back. Let's see if you understand what we're saying. And we did a little bit of interaction for 10, 15 minutes after each of those breaks. Boy, and I'll tell you what, that I think made the world of difference compared to like a webinar, right? You don't really do, usually you don't do that because it kept people just not only engaged, but it's specific to what they're asking. It's specific to what their needs are and what they're trying to understand, not just us explaining it, but we're asking the question back and asking you to respond to it. A little bit put you on the spot. So I mean, it just shows that you got to have that for someone to pass each level. I mean, you got to have that interaction, but that assessment, that test, so that that they're they're ready to move to the next level and ultimately get a certificate.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea, having that Q&A session open up at the end. I like that a lot.
Hey, let's assume that there's someone listening who manages or owns a fab shop, and they've been taking kind of a wait and see approach to this whole COVID thing, and now they're maybe coming to realize that, gee, I need to jump in on this bandwagon of remote training. How would you recommend someone get started? What do they need to look at? What might they need to have on their end to, based on your experience, to make this effective?
Yeah, I can go ahead. From our perspective, I mean, I think it's just a change of mindset, really, is the digital approach. I mean, still, some individuals, some organizations, they still want us to come on site and still want to train. But I think, if you're sitting in your a business owner or a job shop owner, and you're looking at just the effectiveness and the efficiency, kind of Matt has brought up a few times of, hey, you don't have to take an entire day, 2-3 days, fly a guy somewhere to sit down and start training. what we need to have for an effective training is, really it's, I mean, Bob, it's not a huge lift. You need to have a good pair of headphones, to be able to listen, a solid PC, and really a webcam to be able to learn, and to make sure that you set time aside, and make sure that really, if you're a business owner, you have to take that training just as serious as you sending somebody to somewhere, right? So a lot of times what we find in our when we first started, this is kind of starting to slow down a little bit because of so many people are working from home, and they understand the digital trend and the change of needs inside of an organization. But what we found before was we would sign up for a customer to begin training on our software, and 5 minutes before the training would begin, they would have to reschedule. When it's online, that's extremely easy to do, and it's extremely easy to go into your estimator and say, hey, I know that you have training on that product today, but rather than doing that, we're going to pull you aside and you have to work on this project. So I think from a job shop or operations manager, this training is just as important as any other training, whether they're sitting at their desktop, whether they're sitting at their laptop going through a training process, or they're on-prem. And I think that if you're going to try to increase the throughput of your shop, where in the position that you're training, you have to allocate them time to go through and take this just as serious as they were in a training course on-prem somewhere outside of the shop. So I think it's less of getting ready from a technological standpoint, and I think it's more getting ready from a mental standpoint, and understanding those. You have to allow them the time to train and take it just as serious. That's what I'm seeing. Matt, what do you?
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Brad. The nice thing is that the tools to create training materials are readily available and not very expensive. And I think for someone, Bob, to your point, how can someone get started with it? Well, first of all, where are you at right now? Where are you at now, and where do you want to go? If you have nothing, you have a spectrum of options. You have, on one side, you can create, maybe short how-to videos. That's not interactive and all that, but they're helpful. I mean, I've gone on YouTube and looked at how to do something on my car or do something on my boat, right? I mean, they are helpful. You can learn from it. So creating, from one side of the spectrum, where maybe you start creating a library of videos, that's easy to do. It's inexpensive to do. You have to just have the knowledge to do it, and then the commitment, like Brad's saying, you got to commit yourself that you're going to do these, and what are you trying to accomplish, and then make those available. And then kind of in the middle of the spectrum, you could kind of up it a little bit. And there's platforms like Zoom and GoToMeeting, and we call them webinars, web meetings, but basically it's just a way to broadcast a message. So if you choose to use training as that method, and you want to broadcast a live training session, again, it's not expensive to do that. Those platforms are inexpensive, and the tools to use, headphones and mics and all that. You got to have the subject matter expert, someone knows what they're talking about, and then you got to organize a plan of action. What are you trying to accomplish in that? And that, I think, is really the time commitment there. It's not the money, it's your time commitment into developing a training course or presentation that you feel is effective. But it's not a cost thing. That's in the middle of the spectrum. Then on the ultimate is you have, a learning management system platform, interactive training and all that, where that's all the way to the ideal side, where you have a true online training system. But it covers a huge spectrum. I think the biggest thing is get started somewhere based on where you're at, and based on where you're at. And if it's nowhere, you got nowhere to go but up. So start simple, map out a plan, find where the highest need is, where you get the most questions, and start answering those and recording those, if you will, and make those available to people. And I think once you start that momentum, it's kind of like with social media posting. Once you get in a rhythm of doing things and communicating, you just got to stick with it and keep building on it. You'd be surprised at how far you can get.
Great, good advice. That about wraps it up for what I had in mind to touch on today. Is there anything that we did not talk about that you think is important?
No, I think from my perspective, we covered quite a bit. Matt, I mean, you have a lot of experience in this, and it's amazing to have you join us and just hear you talk and hear about the transition that you guys are going through. It's awesome. So I just want to say thank you so much, and then also thank you for being on here. And it's great to learn from you. I know that you've been in the industry for a while, and to hear the other thing is it sounds like you guys at Cincinnati Inc. are so open to train and looking forward and being revolutionary, or revolutionizing not only your products but also the way that you're bringing products and the way that you're training customers. Pretty awesome. So I just want to say thank you so much.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on. The one thing that we have found and I probably is true in most industries and before pandemic, I don't know if that's BP or, we got to have terms, for before pandemic, after pandemic, but training and finding people that are trained has been one of the biggest deficiencies of feedback we get in our industry from everywhere. Any customer we go to, trying to find someone that has the training or the skill set, for what we offer, there's a void. So there's almost unanimously out there's a void in training. So anybody that's putting the effort into building training on their products or things more general to the industry, it's going to be well received because it's a constant thing that's echoed in the industry that there's just not enough resources or the people that they're dealing with just don't have the basics for training. So I think it's a win-win situation to just spend the time in it. Good things can happen from it.
Great. I think I think I speak for Brad as well when I say that it's nice to have an equipment OEM to talk to a little bit on these podcasts, and hopefully we can get you back on to address some of the shop floor equipment issues that fabricators may run into from time to time, or even talk a little bit about what Cincinnati's got coming up from a product perspective.
Yeah, I guess to that point, Matt, is there anything that you guys are coming up with from a training perspective, or anything that you want to talk about, or just where customers can kind of find your information?
Yeah, I think on our, if you're in our industry, whether you're a Cincinnati customer or not, a lot of what we try to do is provide events, and whether it's training or just webinars that are not specific to Cincinnati. So you can go to our website, edasci.com, go to our event section. We do a lot of, we call them virtual demos, where we're broadcasting, advanced application stuff, whether it's laser cutting, press brake bending, additive manufacturing. We're doing stuff like the fundamentals of 3D printing, people that don't understand how you design. So we're trying to do a lot of topics and stuff that are educational in nature. It may not be training, but you're learning something you probably didn't know, and it's not specific to our product. I always welcome people to check us out, and I love to get input on what people want to learn about or what we can be doing better. So I welcome anyone to reach out to us.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, Matt, thank you so much. Bob, thank you so much for joining us here. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brad.
All righty.
Thanks, Matt.